Hello and welcome to this exploring session looking at some more Lord Mayor's shows from the 1620 and 1621. We are into the 1620s, people. We have covered all the major extant texts that exist prior to this. You can go to the YouTube channel and there's a playlist for these pageants. And you can go back and look at those if you're interested. There is also a graphic that I will throw up in my screen later on to give you an idea of the procession route. Lord Mayor's show has a very specific general. You can't have a specific and a general route, surely. No, there's a very specific route that the Lord Mayor's show takes. It's essentially a big circle, which they back up over occasionally as well, starting in the Guildhall, down to the river, gets on boats, boat stuff happens, then they park themselves at St Paul's. And make their way along Cheapside, where the bulk of the pageants that we're concerning ourselves with occur, but more on that as we read through the texts. It is usually, the Lord Mayor show usually happens on the 29th of October, unless that happens to land on a Sunday, in which case it is deferred to the following day on the 30th of October, which is what our first pageant will be landing on, the one from 1620. To read through these texts, try and decode them and unlock them a little bit, we have this wonderful room of readers who will now introduce themselves in the time-approved fashion. So, Eric, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Eric, and I'm thinking that, the circle line is good for a pub crawl, because you just go in circles.
Yeah, it's not quite absolutely but it's the same idea. It is there is a snail tail on the circle line now, so there's a certain logic there. I'm waffling on a way that casual viewers will have no idea what I mean yet. There'll be a graphic that will explain that comment in a moment. Greg, please introduce yourself to stop me from talking.
Hi, I'm Greg, and it's another Lord Mayor's show, so I'm happy.
We're in Greg's happy place. Liza, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Liza. I'm in London, and I did a pub crawl from Newgate Jail to Tyburn one time, which is a procession of a whole different sort.
Rachael, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Rachael, an actor from New Jersey. No funny quip for me today.
Now, we've got to ration funny quips. There's only a finite number of quips in the world. Angela, introduce yourself, please.
Hi there, I'm Angela, or as they call me on a Tuesday night, Pageantange.
Excellent. And also joining us to help us decode what's going on, Tracey, introduce yourself, please.
Well, I'm Pageant Trace, I guess. And I'm definitely in my happy place as well.
Yes, so if you want to dig further into the world of civic pageantry, the Professor Tracey Hill's book, Pageantry and Power, and also a book on Anthony Munday and civic culture is available. These are available now. I should point out that we are absolutely not paid for these adverts. We're just doing them because it's fun, and they are worthy texts to look at and enjoyable reads too. So, without further ado, we are going to dive into this first text, which is going to give us an idea what happened on the 30th of October, 1620. So, Liza, as is our wanton fashion, if you could read the opening bump on the title page, please.
Tes Irenes Trophea, or the Triumphs of Peace, that celebrated the solemnity of the Right Honourable Sir Francis Jones Knight at his inauguration into the mayoralty of London on Monday, being the 30th of October 1620, at the particular cost and charge of the Right Worshipful and Ancient Society of the Haberdashers, with explication of the several shows and devices by L.S. Vere, parva sub in gentimore sed se subisit umbra. London, printed by Nicholas Oakes, 1620.
And yes, that is a JS. We've got a John Squire as our playwright, or pageant right, and we've got a new Lord Mayor coming in, Francis Jones, and we've got the Haberdashers. So Tracey, what can you tell us about the new Lord Mayor? What can you tell us about John Squire?
Well, Squire is a strange choice. He's a cleric, and his other publications were sermons, basically. So I haven't yet been able to fathom exactly what the connection is with him and the Haberdashers, but he clearly knows Tipsley, who was the guy he acknowledges at the end, who was a haberdasher and the artificer, and also worked for the children's acting company. So there's some connection with the stage there in some rather kind of remote way. So it's a very unusual choice. Must have been some sort of personal connection. Francis Jones is ostensibly a completely bog standard, wealthy city merchant, very well thought of, etc., except that he basically scarpered before his term of office was up in 1621 because he'd got himself in such financial difficulty, basically doing the Lord Mayor stuff, hosting parties all the time and that kind of thing. This never happened before, never happened since, I don't think. It was a great scandal. He just legged it. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see when we get to 1621 if that gets mentioned at all. Yes, Lord Mayors are expected to project a certain amount of largesse, and yes, obviously Francis Jones was not able to do that. Right, Greg, could you read the dedication by John Squire, please?
Honourable Sir, I doubt it is in my fortune to hazard calumny in the employment of my invention in your service, and not the thing, but the person incurs it, whose minority admits censure before trial. Therefore, I beseech your honour seriously to supervise the pleasure I hope your honour will conceive. I've just missed a line there. Therefore, I beseech your honour seriously to supervise this slight labour, scarce meriting your attention, and the content you want in this, let it be but added to the pleasure, I hope, your honour will conceive at view of these real triumphs, scarce admitting a second, which your liberal society have so nobly bestowed on you, and then I doubt not but to attempt that credit which many will envy. Thus wishing that the triumphs of your peace may forever attend you, I remain your honour's servant, John Squire.
Yeah, it's a slightly tricky syntax on that one. That's a tricky one. It's full of the usual sort of things of I'm ever so humble, and this thing. I hope you enjoyed it. Any thoughts from the room briefly on that? Does anything leap out on John Squire's dedication there to the Lord Mayor? Rachel.
No, I just wanted to ask Tracey a little bit more about the haberdashers. Like, what was their what were they in, like, the London guilds? You know what I mean? Like how the goldsmiths had a lot of money. Did they have a lot of money, or were they on good standings with people? Like, who were they?
Yeah, they think they did all right. They were. There was a bit of controversy in their past because they'd had a kind of forcible marriage with the Hatters Company. They had a number of members who were strangers, so others from overseas. But yeah, they were kind of a big, wealthy company, nothing particularly remarkable, I don't think. They were but Jones himself had been the master of the company at least 2 occasions before. So the archivist told me, actually, when I did my tweet thing last year, that this was a massive disgrace to the company that their main man should do what he did.
Okay, well, this text dives straight into description of the actual pageants itself. We don't have anywhere near, by the looks of it, as much justification and explication of the thoughts behind it. That may come more into the text as we go. So we go straight into the first show or presentment on the water. So this is presumably at the beginning of the day. They've wandered down in order down to the water from the Guildhall down to get onto their boats, onto the barges to head off to Westminster. So this is, as I say, presumably the first presentment at that stage of the event. So nice and early in the morning. So Angela, could I ask you to read the setup here of this first show?
The first show, or presentment, on the water was a chariot, aptly contrived of 2 sea monsters argent, and drawn by 2 seahorses, set also off with pure silver. On this chariot was one borne representing Oceanus, his head wreathed with segs, one hand grasping a sceptre of green reeds to show his potent sway within his watery dominions, and the other curbing the forward fierceness of his horses. His azure locks and beard o'ergrown hung like the careless emblem of reverend age, dishevered o'er his naked limbs, which were shadowed off with a mantle of sea green taffety lined with waves and fishes. Limbed with waves and fishes. This first presentment ushered on a stately, well-built ship bearing full sail, figuring the traffic or trade of the worthy to be esteemed noble company of the haberdashers. Behind the ship sat Aeolus, the god of winds, filling their sails with prosperous gusts, and at each corner of the ship sat upon small islands the 4 parts of the world, Asia, Africa, America, and Europa, each of them inviting their trade unto their coasts. Asia was attired in an antique habit of peach-coloured satin, and buskins of the same, a coronet on her head, and a censer in her hand, reeking with Panchanian spices. Africa, a blackamoor in a naked shape, adorned with beads, and in her hand the branch of a nutmeg tree. America, a tawny Moor, upon her head a crown of feathers and bases of the same, at her back a quiver of shafts, and in her hand a Parthian bow. Europa, in a robe of crimson taffety, on her head an imperial crown conferred on her by the other 3 as Empress of the Earth, and holding in her hand a cluster of grapes to signify her full swollen plenty. These meeting the Lord Mayor on the Thames at 3 Cranes Wharf, where he took water, Oceanus made this speech.
And Liza, if I could ask you to read Oceanus, and Rachel, if I could ask you to read Aeolus that follows.
I that am styled the potent king of waves, Oceanus, he that in a moment can curb the vast depth of sea when as it raves, and level marble mountains that have ran to ruin earth and skies. I now am sent from all the watery deities to attend thy stately triumphs, as an honour meant to add unto thy greatness, which to the end and confines of our rule hath clapped his wings. For still the water nymphs and gods of streams, running unto my bosom, each one brings report of thee. But my beloved Thames, full often when the cheerful lamp of day hath warmed my chilly bowels with his fires, hath ticed me from his comfort with a lay of what thou art, and then with prayers, desires, and what else could attract me to consent, hath yielded to my convey thy large ships, to traffic through my wide, vast continent. And now, with a desire that outstrips imagination, I am come to see and wonder at the state which I now find, for to attend thy brotherhood and thee. And now with you this league I will combine, that while the influence of the forked moon appoints my curled billows ebbs and tides, while that the shipman throws to heaven his boon for safe return, and while that Stella rides with sparkling glory o'er my wrinkled face, my care shall be for ever to attend your wealthy bottoms to your coasts apace, And this my promise will I never end nor break, until your wealth and states surmount Tagus' unvalued sands in the account.
And the speech of Aeolus now follows.
And here the god of winds his promise plights, that whilst the boisterous north and gentle west, the south and nipping east wind, days and nights, begirt the desert ocean, ready pressed, to execute my will with prosperous gales, I will send home your ships and take delight to play with gentle murmurs on your sails. Thus, since both seas and winds themselves unite, unto your good I wish all powers divine might unto their love and aids incline. Might unto you their love and aids incline.
And there will pause. So if you can see on my little map that I brought up, they've started up at the Guildhall. They've made their way down to 3 cranes, as stated in the text just now. So yeah, we've got lots of little details here, and I'm just not quite sure precisely how to unpack this. So we've got a chariot, 2 sea monsters argent drawn by 2 seahorses, but then we seem to also have a boat quality following on. We've had boats before, a ship that gets lined up with various things. Each corner of the ship, the 4 parts of the world: Asia, Africa, America, and Europa, and various figures around that. So I'm sort of wondering if this first show comes with 2 parts, or whether the horses are drawing the boat forward, or it's because Oceanus meeting effectively with Aeolus there, the wind to blow them forth. I'm trying to explicate that. I do disagree with me and tidy up what I've just been saying while I adjust my image. Anyone want to leap in? Thoughts about this little opening gambit? There is more to come before we get on the water, as it were. Angela.
When you read that first passage, which I have to say is one of the best descriptions I've seen yet of what's supposed to be. But it looks like a whole flotilla of boats that are somehow all connected together, because the whole thing is supposed to be on the water. And there's multiple islands, there's the boat, there's a ship, there's a chariot, there's a ship, there's all these different things. Seems incredible. I mean, could that really happen? Could a whole flotilla be brought together like that? Or am I just over-imagining?
Well, of course, what we've also got going on here is, of course, there are lots of barges on the water as well. So it's this question of what is on the water and will come off the water later, and as opposed to what is just on the water, and the way those elements interact with each other. I don't know if other thoughts, Liza.
I wonder if they had the technology for what we would call pontoons, if they had like square floating rafts that you could build these islands on, and if so, how precarious they were. Maybe they would have to be anchored to barges to keep them from flipping. And as you say, the whole thing is moving along, so they would presumably have to have rowers or some kind of motive force and be connected together. But processions of barges, the historians here know more than me, but processions of barges on the river were not uncommon, right? Were they? I'm wrong.
Pick up on the idea of the pontoon. I think you're right there, Liza, because it's very clear for a lot of these texts that the water show was then transferred to the land, so it must have been able to be kind of movable on both media, if you like. It seems to me that both are devices. I think Aeolus is behind everything, because his role is to push air towards. I mean, that's his role as a god, minor god. So I think it's as you say, it's fairly clear what happens after what. The thing that's always puzzled me about this particular part of this show is the 4 islands of the 4 parts of the world, because the Haberdashers had very little to do with international trade. It wasn't really their thing. So there's I don't know why Squire and Tipsley decided to go for this particular idea, not least because I got it completely wrong. I don't think nutmegs come from Africa for a start. So it's a kind of a strange one. Clearly some decision went on that this would be an appropriate device for the haberdashers, but on the face of it, it isn't appropriate.
Yes, we've got various figures here being exoticized for their foreignness and questions, which obviously today are a lot more problematic. But it's odd for who they are, what they're trying to represent. And yeah, it presents all these interesting logistical questions because, say, these elements do end up on the land again, or probably do. They usually do. So they need to be able to be got off where they currently are on the water. So it's presumably the Lord Mayor comes down to the water, gets onto his barge, and these are arranged around him in a way that is pleasing and within earshot, so that he can hear Oceanus and Aeolus. And then once his barge has gone up to Westminster, that they can go through the awkward process of unloading all this stuff back onto the land for use in pageantry later on. So yes, we seem to have the seahorses, the chariot of Oceanus, and behind that you've got Aeolus, and there's a ship, and so that Aeolus is there to blow the ship forward, at least figuratively. Rachael, I think.
Maybe this, the four corners of the world and all these things that is focusing on international trade. Maybe they themselves aren't involved with the international trade, but there has to be at this moment, I think, some like globalization, like the world has to be seeming to open up to them because of the slave trade. So I'm sure they're hearing about people like, your everyday person in London at that time must have been hearing about these things. I don't know if England was involved in the slave trade at this time, but they had begun to take people to North America and South America for as slaves.
Liza.
Yeah, famously, the first enslaved African people to be that were known to be shipped to the English colonies in North America were taken there in 1619. So it would have been the year before this, and we have not only a depiction of trade but also of what looks like colonialism, in that we have Africa and certainly Africa and America depicted, and Asia depicted, and I'm quoting here, conferring a crown on Europa as Empress of the Earth. So I think a couple of years ago we had a depiction of the king and queen of the Moors in the pageant, and they didn't seem to be inferior. They certainly didn't speak as though they were inferior. They seemed to be honored guests with a certain dignity to them. And they were not treated as inferior by the European characters, but now we have this vivid depiction of the subordination of other areas of the world to Europe.
Yeah,
so,
and it's not just the handing on the crown as well. A cluster of grapes to signify her full swollen plenty. I mean, it's, that Europe is gathering the plenty of others. I mean, it's actually it's a very laden image, and yes, it might be that this material is here in part because we have had previous other versions of this kind of thing. Not that the haberdashers necessarily connect, but it's just this is the kind of thing that we might expect from a Lord Mayor's show after various examples in the past, or other narratives being fed into here. Eric, then Rachael.
I can't remember where I read this, but I remember reading that, like, Europe was basically in the 14 and 15, well, like start of the 1500s, so like pre-Renaissance, basically. There was this whole thing about like how Europe was really not rich at all. It was because it like they basically didn't have cities in the same way that the East did. But obviously by this point they've kind of started expanding, and they're kind of started even like sort of semi-propaganda at this point.
Rachel?
No, I was also going to say, I think that globalization and that, you know, the slave trade is really, I think this is also, they're looking to try and mold an international identity. How are they, in this time period, how are they trying to, how are they going to fit into the new economy of Europe and remain a competitor, you know, militarily and economically? And I think it's sort of this is what this part, some of this is that coming to that identity or trying to create it.
I think you're right there, Rachel. I think that if we look at 1619, there's a big push to try and set up luxury manufactories in England in an attempt to compete. Up until now, Spain is the big imperialist power, and there's of course a desire to compete with that as well. And I think you're absolutely right that, and Eric too, this is about like boosting everybody's idea of themselves, you know, as some great power. Right at this moment, you know, England isn't even participating in like the big wars that are going on in Spain or much else. But what they are trying to do, of course, is set up colonies in America. They are trying to do that, and they're growing and bringing back tobacco. They're very slowly starting to work on that. It's getting to be a big thing, and so I think you're right that this is a big PR job.
The companies, even the very small minor companies, were basically forced by King James to invest in Ireland primarily, actually, but in some cases in Virginia in this period. But I think the trade, you shouldn't confuse that with the trade with the East Indies, because that was quite different. That really was just trade. And the competition there wasn't Spanish, but the Dutch, who kind of got in there first, really. So it's a mixed picture. And of course, it's not helped by the fact this is a very confused account of these continents. It compares very interestingly to some of the visual representations you get in sort of maps and things like that in the period too.
So it might be more that we're building the narrative than direct connections in that sense. Eric, final thought before we move on.
I was going to say that it's also interesting that we've got Greek gods here instead of like Roman gods. We don't have. I mean, like the names are Roman, and sort of the whole mythology seems to be not Roman. I mean Greek, or at least classical Greek, which is interesting compared to I don't know previous ones where we've had like I don't know other, and we haven't had like sort of English speaking deities mentioned or anything. It's just like sort of
Okay, we're going to move forward. Greg, if I could ask you to read the next bit of prose coming up until we get to the song. I'll ask Rachel to read the song, and then we'll briefly pause. So the second presentment on the water, please.
The second and last presentment on the water was Parnassus Mount, whereon the 9 muses sat. Clio, the first, suited in a gown of purple taffety and studiously employed in turning over books, she being the historical muse. Melpomene was attired in a black taffety robe, her head decked with cypress and playing on a theorbo. Thalia, the comic muse, in a light, changeable taffety robe and playing on a viol. I'm going to go for that. Viol, sorry. Euterpe, the muse that first invented wind instruments, was richly apparelled and played on a flute recorder. Terpsichore on the lute, and the geometrical muse, Erato, with a seal and compass in her hand.
The heroical muse Calliope was shaped in a tawny silk robe and her temples girt with bays. The heavenly muse Urania, that invented astrology, was decked in a robe of azure taffety, seamed with stars. Seamed with stars? No. On her head, she wore a coronet of stars again, and her right hand she supported a sphere. Polymnia, the inventress of rhetoric, assumed her place nearest to Apollo, who sat on the top of the mount in a robe of cloth of gold, under a laurel tree, playing on a harp, alluding to that of Virgil. In medio residens complectitur omnia Phoebus, and on the backside of the mount stood Mercury, listening to their harmonious strains. This accompanied the Lord Mayor up to Westminster with a variety of music, while his honour was taking the oath, it returned back and met him in Paul's churchyard, where Euterpe and Terpsichore entertained him with this song.
We muses of the pleasant hill, that bath within the Thespian spring, that did direct the Grecians' quill, who of old Peleus' son did sing, we that Amphion did inspire with admired strains and lays, and did infuse a sacred fire in both these to gain the bays. We Apollo's handmaids 9, come to meet thee on the way, that unto thy honour's shrine we might dedicate this day, and his deity us among, so curiously shall rest the glory, that the envious monks this throng shall confess its merit story.
And thus the 9 muses stop singing there. So we've effectively jumped in time midway through this. We have this description of the 9 muses on Parnassus Mount. So we've got potentially a tiered structure here, but hold your horses on how many, on whether we may have another tiered structure in a moment. And this starts on the water, and it accompanied the Lord Mayor up to Westminster. So we started at 3 cranes. They go up to Westminster on the water. But this one is unpacked while he's doing all the oath-taking and ends up at Paul's churchyard. So we'll be returning to Paul's stairs and heading up to St. Paul's churchyard perhaps in a moment. So it's really interesting. This one is definitely used twice. Any brief thoughts on the 9 muses presented here? Liza?
Well, as a musician, this is fascinating to me because we get a whole consort of musicians and we get their instruments specified. And I believe the music for this survives, right? Or at least the music for the song. We get some of the muses holding instruments. Presumably the ones not holding instruments are presumably the singers. Maybe they all sing. I don't even know if we have a composer attested here, but it must have been a very pleasant song to be sung several times over as the procession accompanied the mayor to Westminster. And I'm hoping that this was the 30th of October, so I'm hoping that the cold did not affect the tuning of the instruments or the singers' voices. I hope they all got a cup of mulled wine later on, and that the silk garments they were wrapped in were nice and warm and insulating.
Yeah, it was a few years back we had a pageant where everyone was wearing really heavy cloth, and we're probably really glad of it. Silk in this time of year is perhaps not the best thing to be wearing.
Silk does insulate. To this day, you can get thermal underwear made of silk to go hiking in. Very, very, very luxurious. So it does have the property of keeping you warm or keeping you cool, but generally you need more than one layer to do that, especially in October.
The number of layers is not attested in this document. Other thoughts? Rachel?
No, I was just gonna say it sounds like they've put a lot more money into this than some of the previous years' Lords Mayors shows. I know Tracey said for one of them that there were complaints and they tried to get their money back. But this one, it sounds like, I don't know, just from the way that or maybe it's just that the description of this that survived is just a little richer. But just from the description of the clothes they're wearing and that they have all these instruments and that all these people they're paying, it seems like a bigger year than some of the previous ones have been.
That's really interesting. The haberdashers had very few Lord Mayors up until the 1620s, but they had quite a few after that, which is kind of interesting. They obviously got more involved in city politics thereafter. But yes, I think you're right, Rachel. It's partly because you get a lot of detail of the costumes and the fabrics and so on, but also I think it is, you don't get a sense that it's kind of any corners have been cut really. It probably helped that Tipsley had links with the stage as well. I wouldn't be too surprised if some of the costumes hadn't been borrowed.
Okay. So yes, we is this the music that we've got, Tracey? We have a link that we'll be able to share in the show notes. So hopefully you'll be able to listen to the music available, if not live now, but it is available. So that is something you can inhabit in a bit. We're going to read on to the third presentment, which is it's a quadrangle. Apparently, it's always nice to know the shapes involved. I'll ask Angela to read this. There seem to be some superfluous oars that I've just noticed. I suspect you've just skipped those. I think, and I don't think they are options. I think
no, ore is heraldic for gold.
So gold. Oh, excellent. So golden.
Well done, Liza. I was literally about to jump in because I was going, yes, there they are right.
They are right. Well, excellent. Just how to approach them in terms of saying them, in terms of clarity. Excellent. I ask so I can be corrected. Angela, if you could read the third presentment. I don't know where on the map the third presentment is occurring, whether this is still part of what happened earlier or whether we're now about to make our way from St. Paul's. We will find out in a moment.
The third presentment was a quadrangle that mounted by ascents to the form of an Egyptian pyramid, whereon, in a well-wrought landscape, where figured the several shires of England. On the top sat a princely majesty, accoutred in a robe of purple velvet spurred with ermines. On his head he wore an imperial crown, and in his right hand a sceptre. Over his head were fixed the arms of England, and at his feet a lion couchant, which did demonstrate his power in reconciling fierceness unto a willing servitude. Under him sat 2 dukes, 2 marquises, 2 earls, and 2 barons in parliament robes of purple velvet. About their necks they wore collars of S's, and on their heads the apt cognizance of each one's honour. At the 4 corners of this pyramid stood 2 lions or, and 2 unicorns argent, supporting 4 streamers, wherein were escutcheoned the arms of our 4 kingdoms, England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. Before it was charactered in a scroll, Republica Beata, and round about it ran the ocean. This pyramid was supported by 4 silver Corinthian columns, the bases and capitals fine gold. Within these columns sat 4 persons that seemed, as it were, to underprop the ponderous burthen of the pyramid. The first was the city, presented in a scarlet gown, guarded with black velvet, like a lady mayor's, and in her hand 2 golden keys. The other The country in a rustic habit. The third, the law, habited like a judge, and a scroll in his hand. The fourth, religion, in a rochet like a bishop, and in his hand a book. At the four corners of this undersquare stood 2 lions or and 2 goats argent, which are the supporters of the company's arms, bearing 4 large streamers, in which were the arms of the city and of the company, and in the front stood the crest of the Lord Mayor, a lion supporting an azure anchor, and on it was fixed his coat of arms, which was a chef d'or with a lion d'or upon a field azure between 3 crossed forms all.
So that's not a complicated structure at all. So it's a pyramid on some columns with some things in the columns, but then there's some things within the columns, and there's a lot of there's a lot of things there. There's quite a few lions. There's 4 lions in total, 2 unicorns and 2 goats.
This fellow was after a job. He wants to be a herald.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
No, that was last week. Liza.
So we've suddenly got a lot of heraldic devices and heraldic language in this description. And yeah, it sort of hooks into this long, deep British tradition of arms and tableaus and significations of that sort. Ore is heraldic for gold, argent is heraldic for silver, azure is heraldic for blue. The first lion is shown couchant, which means lying down, much like the lions. I think the lions on the current arms of England are couchant, the 3 lions above each other. I do like the representations of the city. A woman dressed in a female version of a Lord Mayor's garments, and the country in rustic attire. The haberdashers must have had fun with that. What I think is given in our text when they say the Lord Mayor's coat of arms at the end of the paragraph, I think because so much of English heraldry is derived from the French language, I think what's being said, a chief, or in our text might be a serf, a stag, though I could be wrong. I have to look at the manuscript, this is unpacking all this symbolism and imagery is just super fun and interesting. It would be nice to see a visual representation. I know sometimes they did do those.
Excellent. Well, we're going to move on to the 4th and 5th pageants. Rachel, if I could ask you to read the 4th presentment. Eric, if you could read the 5th. And then Greg, hopefully, fingers crossed, our connections will remain stable. If I could ask you to be time. And then we may rattle on actually after that, but that's enough. That's enough things being passed out for the moment.
The 4th presentment, being the main pageant, was a mount, where on the top, under a canopy limed with stars, was seated Catherine, the saint of the company, whom antique stories report to be the daughter of Costus, king of Alexandria. She was attired in a snow-white satin gown. In one hand she held a book, and in the other a sword with the point downward, it being the instrument that in death sealed her the fruition of immortal rest. Her head circled with a crown of gold, which did intimate her princely descent, and at her feet lay a broken wheel. Round about her sat attendants, 12 maids of honor, gorgeously attired, each one bearing in her hand a silver shield, upon which were portrayed Catherine wheels, and within them the motto of the company's arms, serve and obey. Under these sat her servants at work, some carding wool, some spinning, others knitting caps, with her felt makers, one bowed, one basined, and another blocked. And behind the mount sat a shepherd keeping his sheep, each of which industrious, faculties have reference to the support of this worshipful society.
The fifth and last invention was a chariot painted full with hourglasses and sundials. The four wheels were two globes, and the hinder wheels were like two church dials. Within it, aged time was drawn. Seated upon an hourglass that was supported on the shoulders of a giant, representing the Iron Age. In one hand he held a sickle, in the other a crutch, and in the chariot with him were drawn the four elements: ignis, air, aqua, and terra. Ignis, fire, was attired in a flame-colored taffety robe, leaning on a salamander, and in his hand threatened lightning. Air, in a robe limbed with clouds and several shapes of birds, and in his hand a dove. Aqua, water, in a robe limbed with waves and fishes, her azure tresses decked with flags, and in her hand a vessel full of live fishes. Terra, earth, in a robe on which grass and flowers sprang as it were naturally. On her head stood green corn, and in her hand she bare a silver spade. This chariot was drawn by the four seasons of the year: Ver the spring, Estes the summer, autumn, and Heims winter. Ver was suited in green taffety, a chaplet of flowers on her head, a bow in her hand, and a quiver at her back like a huntress. Estes was in a yellow taffety robe, and her bows like Ceres, decked with ripe corn, and a cornucopia in her hand. Autumn, in a naked shape like Bacchus, his temples wreathed with vines, and in his hand a cluster of grapes. Heims, winter, in a furred gown, in his hand a pan of burning coals. This chariot, in the evening, when the Lord Mayor came to Paul's at the upper conduit in Cheapside, time made this speech.
Methinks I see amazement pierce each eye that views me representing my weak state, who, sated with my dull variety, turn back their heads I do not imitate, but show the spacious world the age I bear. For when command of the immortal powers had given me being, when I first did rear my nimble essence on the winged hours, I went forth like the spring, and did behold and wear out man's first days, the age of gold. Then rose the silver age, and that decayed. Successively another gan to reign, called the brazen age. When that did fade, this last prop of the world that doth sustain my ponderous glass and me, the Iron Age, sprung up to be my Atlas. Were he gone, these elements attending would with rage turn feeble time to desolation. But now do you not wonder much to see me, as I am eyed, a solemnity, like to a victor born triumphantly? O honoured Lord, it is to shew the love I bear to thee in thy society, whose bounteous entertainments are above all that I ever found. Now in return I promise this: if that with honoured care thou execute thy charge, then shall thy urn be reverenced, and thither shall repair a blessed memory that never dies, to blazon it onto posterities.
So I'm just interested here whether this sort of this speech by time, because it says this chariot in the evening when the Lord Mayor came to Paul's, so the procession would have made its way from Paul's back to the Guildhall, where everyone would have a slap-up meal, and then he would make his way back to Paul's for a service. So whether this speech by time is actually after all the pageantry, or the main part of the pageantry has occurred, because the bit that's about to follow seems like it's actually part of the pageant on their way to the Guildhall, if I'm making sense. So I'm wondering whether this text is quite all in the right order. I'm fielding that as a suggestion, not as a certainty. We've occasionally had bits not necessarily in the right place before. To gather thoughts on that, I'm going to ask us to read on actually to the next bit to see whether that bears fruit. Rachel, could I ask you to read the next bit under this pyramid, because this is describing the pyramid that we had on the third presentment. And Liza, if you could be peace, please.
Under this pyramid sat Peace, that changed her celestial mansion to make us happy with the sweet pleasures of a quiet state. On her head she wore a wreath of olives, in her right hand a palm. Her robe was of white taffety, limed with the map of England. In her lap she bare the model of London, and on her left arm a shield, whereon was unday argent and azure upon a bend gules, a lion passant gardant floor. The arms of the society at her feet lay war and complet arms upon spears, lances, folded ensigns, and leaning on an unbracked drum. This shew passed along till the Lord Mayor came to St. Laurence Lane end, where Peace began to speak thus.
A welcome, honoured praetor, I do give, free and unbounded as my wish to live, and to retain the blessed styles are given me with applause of nations and of heaven, from whence I boast my lineage. I am Peace, that my long pilgrimage did never cease, from the first minute of the aged world until I found this island, for, being hurled out of each region by rebellious war, which now lies bound my vassal, like a star whose unfixed glory glides from sphere to sphere, I wandered up and down, and not a tear I shed, but with it went a sigh, that I might be so favoured of the deity to be recalled from earth, which, when they saw me from the world besides, they did withdraw to this then troubled state, which did embrace me with such joy that nobles flocked apace to entertain me, and the poor did stand to crave my blessing to o'erflow their land, and jointly all of them delivered war, fettered in chains to be my prisoner. Now, honoured lord, since that you find and see Peace placed here by a divine decree within this commonwealth, and chiefly here within this city, where for 1 whole year thy mandates are obeyed, then have a care to see me safely kept. And since you bear that powerful sway about ye that attends the execution of your will and ends, employ it so nobly that my general state may say thou leadst the way to imitate.
And yes, so this is at the St. Lawrence Lane end of Cheapside, so that's sort of a little beyond the Standard towards the Guildhall there on the map. The earlier speech with time is at the upper conduit. I'm not sure which of the conduits that's referring to, the upper conduit. Tracy?
It's the little conduit. It's the pissing conduit, in other words, the one at the top.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, whether Peace, the speech by Peace, is part of the procession where they're going to the Guildhall at sort of in the afternoon, and the time is the evening one, or is it just a confusion of evening and thing? What the order of service for these elements are? There's no particular. It's just the route is. I'm getting a bit confused by that. Am I wrong in suggesting that they're the wrong way around? Basically, is what I'm asking.
It's odd. It does seem like they have to wait through a whole church service to have war's answer to peace. Maybe the ordering is a little out of joint, but the description seems really clear and cogent.
Well, the war, which is the bit we haven't read yet for the viewers at home, that's very much at the end of the day. That section seems to be in the right place. Because it's after they've gone back to St. Paul's, they've had their for a service, and then they're about to go home. So it's really the question of the speech by time is whether that's on his way to Paul's after going to the Guildhall and having meal, and whether the speech by Peace is at the same time that later part of the evening, whether the speech of peace is part of the procession in the afternoon from St Paul's to the Guildhall. So it's just that question of where all these bits go together, and is there any actual data to conclusively say which? We don't have to have the answers now, of course. I'm just raising those questions because I'm thinking about this as a stage manager. Basically, that's how I think about these texts. Where do the bits go, and when do you cue them?
I think there may be some reuse of pageant stages. Actually, I think there might be on this leg you get this device, and on the other leg you get that device, but at the same place. That might be what is causing a bit of confusion. I mean, it's certainly noticeable that there's a repetition of four kind of figures on some of these pageant devices, which suggests that they might be placed in the same location consecutively, using the same space. I'm not sure.
Well, that's why I was asking about the upper conduit, because one's at the upper conduit and the other's at St Lawrence Lane end, so they're the opposite ends of Cheapside.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, they'd still be the wrong way round, but they might be the wrong way round at the same time of day. If that makes sense. So I'm slightly confused. Anyway, it doesn't matter at this time. We can move on. We do need to actually finish this text. So I will ask Greg if you can read the remaining bits in prose. I'll ask Angela if you could be war. So this definitely is after the day has wound down. There's been a sermon at St Paul's, and the Lord Mayor is going to go home to bed.
It is decreed, nor can my power...
Oh, sorry, no, we have a bit of prose first. Greg, after the sermon.
Sorry, that's why I thought it was. After the sermon at St Paul's Church was ended, the Lord Mayor returned back by torchlight to his house, attended by the whole body of the solemnity, where being come to his gate, war from out the pageant called the Commonwealth made this speech.
It is decreed, nor can my power resist this most inevitable doom of fate. I have forgot my nature and consist of something more than lenity. My state at first was sovereignty, and that same sway that curbed dominions, for I mounted on the back of horror, bathed in blood, could fray peace from their coasts, then desolation I could command to raise my statues there. That nations far remote with mourning eyes should not rehearse the story without fear, lest I might so close up to their obsequies. I taught the Romans to immortalize their names by their great acts, and to refine their mean creation by the sacrifice of their own blood to war and to my shrine. They offered mighty spoils, but now I bear captivity about me. Yet like one that renders servitude for love nor fear, employing his devotion to be shown as free as if his mind could captivate his will, I yield to sacred peace and you, that this day have with a triumphant state entered your charge and office, which the due of time admits you to, and should it chance that any foreign arms from out this throne strive to enforce her, I will then advance my ensigns to her aid, and make it known that this is her inheritance and place, which heaven hath pointed out to be her rest. And therefore, worthy Lord, follow the trace of noble precedents, and in thy breast resolve of future hazards, and prepare me such provisions that if times should cease to be unto this land as now they are, war might again restore again the palm to peace.
This speech being ended, peace and war dismounted from under the pyramid. Peace conducted the Lord Mayor into his house, and war stood with fire and sword to defend his gates. And thus the solemnity dissolved. Credit to this workmanship, curiously exceeding many former shows and far more rich than any, in regard no metal was used to adorn it but gold and silver, I impose on Francis Tipsley, citizen and haberdasher of London. Finis.
I always like the closing credits. I like the fact that we've got war stood with fire and sword to defend his gates. I'm expecting full wavy, flamey things there. I expect it. I hope for it at all times, frankly. So that's definitely the end of the day. We've got the pyramid pageant. They're calling it the Commonwealth, which makes sense when that's the one where we've got the various shires of England on it. So from within that, they seem to have war and peace, prefiguring Tolstoy by several hundred years. Any thoughts about this one, Angela?
It just strikes me that this guy, John Squire, about whom we don't know anything, he comes over as a proper vicar because he's been educated at university, and it seems to me a lot of these ideas are coming from somebody with that kind of education, so that he's kind of ignored a bit what the haberdashers do. That's of little interest to him, but he's got this fantastic vision of what a city should be, and it just seems to be coming out of all that kind of reading. It just, and all the heraldry, of course, if he's a parish vicar, then he has to know about that stuff, because of course all those things get littered all over his church, no doubt, as people die. Anyway, it just I don't know we don't know about him, you say, Tracy, but
not very much. That's a really interesting suggestion, though. I think it's worth coming back to that when we move on to do some Haworth shows in the 1630s, because he too, as he constantly reminds you, was a university man. There might be some, I can kind of see what you're saying. Actually, it's not civic history as such he's drawing on. You don't get the kind of Stowe type stuff you get in Monday's shows. It's more sort of classic kind of humanist tropes here. Good idea. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the way war brings up Rome and spoils, and those which feeding a little bit into some of the imagery we were talking about earlier, about this sort of dreams of dominions and empire and things. I mean, there's interesting prefiguring going on there that I wonder about, resonances, if not literal connections.
I think also 1620, any reference to peace is Rex Paterson is about James's policy towards the continent and the kind of the 30 Years' War, which is well underway by now.
Liza.
Well, I was on a bit of a different tangent, which was about stage design and painting. And I know Angela and Tracy have been mentioned the name of someone who might have been the painter in the chat. I would love for them to talk a little more about that. And I would also like to know who Francis Tipsley was, whether he was a patron who gave money for the designs, or whether he designed it, or whether he made it. I do like that they're saying it curiously exceeding many former shows and far more rich than any. We had a budget here, guys. No metal was used to adorn it, but gold and silver. I have difficulty believing that they'd use real gold leaf for something as ephemeral as this, but maybe they did. Who knows? Perhaps Angela and Tracy will know more.
Tipsley was involved, as I think I said earlier, with the children's acting companies. So he was a member of the Haberdashers' Company as well. So he had a kind of a sort of a foot in the trade as well as on the stage. So he's got a kind of a drama background to an extent, which you often find with a writer like Squire, who has no kind of pedigree here. He's just a one-off. So yeah, that's kind of him really. As far as painters are concerned, I mean, there's a whole body of them. I haven't looked at the Haberdashers' records for some years now. I can't remember off the top of my head which painters were involved. I'm kind of guessing it was Richard Kimby, because his dates match, and he was really good at heraldry as well. But yeah, they spent a lot of money on these kind of quite exquisite painted silks, the banners and streamers and things.
Okay, a few additional thoughts before we go on to the next pageant. Greg?
Two very quick ones. I think it said before. I'm missing and the Romans used. There wasn't so much of that in this one. I think that seems to have gone down from the previous ones. Also, did the haberdashers provide free gifts?
The text does not seem to indicate anything gets thrown at the audience. Not even,
Unfortunately, I was having visions
Very
of
disappointed.
cloths and so on, but whatever haberdashers provide. But yes.
Well, to be honest, I think I'd still be traumatised after having fish thrown at me the few years back.
Well, yes.
Not pilchards again. Okay. Anything else before we go into the Sun in Aries the following year? No. Okay, so we're jumping forward in time slightly under a year because this is actually happening on the 29th of October rather than on the 30th. So, Liza, if you would please read the introductory bump for 1621.
The Sun in Aries. A noble solemnity performed through the city at the sole cost and charges of the honourable and ancient fraternity of drapers, at the confirmation and establishment of their most worthy brother, the Right Honourable Edward Barkham, in the high office of His Majesty's Lieutenant the Lord Mayor of the famous city of London. Taken beginning at his lordship's going, and perfecting itself after his return from receiving the oath of mayoralty at Westminster on the morrow after Simon Jude's Day, being the 29th of October, 1621, by Thomas Middleton, gent, at London, printed by Edward Aldie for H.G., 1621.
So, 1621, it's drapers. And again, we have a new incumbent, Edward Barkham. What do we know about drapers and Barkham?
Right, okay. Well, there's a reference later on in the text to a man called Richard Pipe, who translated, in other words, switched companies from the leather sellers to the drapers. He's the only one in the past who's done that to become Lord Mayor. And Barkham was indeed a member of the leather sellers, master of the leather sellers, who were one of the minor companies. He was obviously quite well connected at court because certain courtiers lent on the drapers really, really heavily to admit into their ranks. They didn't want him. They didn't want another Lord Mayor. They'd had 1614 and 1615. They did not want to do it again. I've written quite a lot about this, actually. It went on for months and months. They were just basically saying, no, digging their heels in. And in the end, of course, the king got involved and they had to capitulate. So it was a bit inauspicious, really, especially given what happened with Jones the year before. Middleton makes the best of it. This is the first Lord Mayor show that Middleton has produced after he becomes city chronologer as well. So he's now got a kind of a formal role in relation to the city's kind of PR, if you like. So it's a lot at stake for him here, I think.
Okay, we're going to dive into the text. We're going to read actually a reasonably long chunk now that we've got our eye in the game as to how the processional functions. We'll read on. I'll ask Liza actually to continue reading the rest of the dedication by Thomas Middleton. I'll ask Angela to read the big chunk of prose from Pisces through to before this speech presented by Jason. And Eric, if you could be Jason, and Rachel, if you could do the big chunk of prose that follows after that. And then we may get to Fame, I Want to Live Forever. Greg, if you could read Fame, please. So, big chunk. Let's dive into this. Mr. Middleton, if you could begin.
To the honour of him to whom the noble fraternity of drapers, his worthy brothers, have dedicated their loves in costly triumphs, the Right Honourable Edward Barkham, Lord Mayor of this renowned city. Your honour being the centre where the lines of this day's glorious circle meets and joins, love, joy, cost, triumph, all by you made blessed, there does my service too desire to rest. At your lordship's command, Thomas Middleton.
Pisces, being the last of the signs and the wane of the sun's glory, How fitly and desiredly now the sun enters into Aries for the comfort and refreshing of the creatures, and may be properly called the springtime of right and justice, observed by the shepherd's calendar in the mountain to prove a happy year for poor men's causes, widows and orphans. Comforts so much to make good the sun's entrance into that noble sign. I doubt not, but the beams of his justice will make good themselves. And first, to begin with the worthy love of his honourable society to his lordship, after his honour's return from Westminster, having received some service upon the water. The first triumph by land attends his lordship's most wished arrival in Paul's churchyard, which is a chariot, most artfully framed and adorned, bearing the title of the Chariot of Honor, in which chariot many worthies are placed that have got trophies of honour by their labours and deserts, such as Jason, whose illustration of honour is the golden fleece, Hercules, with his ne plus ultra upon pilasters of silver, a fair globe for conquering Alexander, a gilt laurel for triumphant Caesar, and Jason, at the approach of his lordship, being the personage most proper by his manifestation for the society's honour, lends a voice to these following words.
So the words of Jason, this is all at Paul's churchyard. We have basically skipped any details of anything heading down to the water, anything happening on the water. They've gone to Westminster, they've returned, they're in Paul's churchyard, and here we have, on this chariot, speech presented by Jason.
Be favourable fates, and a fair sky smile on this expedition. Phoebus' eye look cheerfully. The bark is under sail for a year's voyage, and the blessed gate be ever with it. 'Tis for justice bound, a coast that's not by every compass found, and goes for honour, life's most precious trading, made return with most illustrious lading, a thing both wished and hoped for. I am he to all adventurous voyages, a free and bountiful well-wisher, by my name hight Jason, first adventurer for fame, which now rewards my danger and o'ertops the memory of all peril, or her stops. Assisted by the noble hopes of Greece, 'twas I from the Colchis that fetched the golden fleece. I'm one of the first brothers on record of honor got by danger. So, great lord, there is no voyage set forth to renown that does not sometimes meet with skies that frown, with gusts of envy, billows of despite, which makes the purchase once achieved more bright. State is a sea, he must be wise indeed, that sounds its depth, or can the quick sands heed. And honor is so nice and rare a prize, 'tis watched by dragons, venomous enemies, then no small care belongs to it. But as I, with my assisting Argonauts, did try the utmost of adventure, and with bold and constant courage, brought the fleece of gold, whose illustration decks my memory through all posterities, naming but me. So, man of merit, never faint or fear. Thou hast the assistance of grave senators here, thy worthy brethren, some of which have passed all dangerous gulfs, and in their bright fames placed. They can instruct and guide thee, and each one that must adventure and are coming on to this great expedition, they will be cheerful and forward to encourage thee. And blessings fall in a most infinite sum both on those past, thyself, and those to come.
Passing from this, and more to encourage the labour of the magistrate, he is now conducted to the master triumph called the Tower of Virtue, which for the strength, safety, and perpetuity bears the name of the Brazen Tower, of which integrity keeps the keys, virtue being indeed as a brazen wall to a city or a commonwealth, and to illustrate the prosperity brings to a kingdom, the top turrets or pinnacles of this brazen tower shine bright like gold, and upon the gilded battlements thereof stand 6 knights, 3 in silvered and 3 in gilt armor, as virtue's standard bearers or champions, holding 6 little streamers or silver bannerets, in each of which are displayed the arms of a noble brother and benefactor, fame sounding forth their praises to the world for the encouragement of after ages, and antiquity the register of fame containing in her golden legend their names and titles, as that of Sir Henry Fitz Alwyn Draper, Lord Mayor 24 years together, Sir John Norman, the first that was rowed in barge to Westminster with silver oars at his own costs and charges, Sir Francis Drake, the son of fame, who in 2 years and 10 months did cast a girdle about the world, the unparalleled Sir Simon Eyre, who built Leaden Hall at his own cost, a storehouse for the poor both in the upper lofts and lower, the generous and memorable Sir Richard Champion and Sir John Milbourne, two bountiful benefactors, Sir Richard Hardell in the seat of magistracy 6 years together, Sir John Pulteney 4 years, which Sir John founded a college in the parish of St. Lawrence Pulteney by Candlewick Street, John Hind, re-edifier of the parish church of St. Swithin by London Stone, Sir Richard Pipe, who being free of the leather sellers, was also from them translated to the ancient and honorable society of drapers, and many whose names, for brevity's cause, I must omit, and hasten to the honor and service of the time present. From the tower, fame, a personage properly adorned, thus salutes the great mayor of the day and triumph.
So fame on this pageant delivers this salutation.
Welcome to Virtue's fortress, strong and clear. Thou art not only safe, but glorious here. It is a tower of brightness, such is truth, whose strength and grace feels perpetual youth. The walls are brass, the pyramids fine gold, which shows 'tis safety's and prosperity's hold. Clear conscience is lieutenant, providence there, watchfulness, wisdom, constancy, zeal, care are the 6 warders. Keep the watchtower sure that nothing enters but what's just and pure, for what effect, both to affright and shame, will slothful bloods that blush to look on fame. An ensign of good actions each displays, that worthy works may justly own their praise. Which is clearest to be understood, thine shines amidst thy glorious brotherhood, circled with arms of honour by those past as now with love's arms by the present graced. And how thy word does thy true worth display, Fortunae mater diligentia, fair Fortune's mother, all may read and see, is diligence endeavouring industry. See here the glory of illustrious acts, all of thy own fraternity, whose tracks 'tis comely to pursue all thy life's race, taking their virtues as thou hold'st their place. Some college founders, temple beautifiers, whose blessed souls sing now in celestial choirs. Erectors some of granaries for the poor, now converted to some rich men's store. The more the age's misery comes, some so rare for this famed city's government and care, they kept the seat 4 years with a fair name, some 6. But one, the miracle of fame, which no society or time can match, 24 years complete he was truth's watch. He went so right and even, and the hand of that fair motion bribe could ne'er make stand. And as men set their watches by the sun, set justice but by that which he has done, and keep it even so from men to men. No magistrate need stir the work again. It lights into a noble hand today, and has passed many, many more it may.
By this tower of virtue, his lordship being gracefully conducted toward the new standard, one in a cloudy, ruinous habit, leaning upon the turret, at a trumpet sounding, suddenly starts and wakes, and in amazement throws off his unseemly garments. Liza, could you throw off your unseemly garments, please, and be this mysterious speaker? Who could it be? You are muted at present, so the flourish was fabulous.
What noise is this wakes me from ruin's womb? Huh? Bless me, time! How brave am I become! Fame fixed upon my head! Beneath me round the figures of illustrious princes, crowned as well for goodness as for state by birth, which makes them true heirs both to heaven and earth. Just 6 in number, and all blessed names, 2 Henrys, Edward, Mary, Eliza, James, that joy of honest hearts. And there behold his honoured substitute, whom worth makes bold to undergo the weight of this degree, virtue's fair edifice, raised up like me. Why, here's the city's goodness shown in either, to raise 2 worthy buildings both together. For when they made that lord's election free, I guess that time their charge did perfect me. Nay, note the city's bounty in both. Still, when they restore a ruin, 'tis their will to be so noble in their cost and care, all blemish is forgot when they repair. For what has been re-edified alate, but lifts its head up in more glorious state, 'tis grown a principle, ruins built again, come bettered both in monuments and men. The instance is apparent. On then, Lord, e'en at thy entrance thou'dst a great man's word, the noblest testimony of fair worth that ever lord had when he first stood forth presented by the city. Lose not then a praise so dear, bestowed not on all men. Strive to preserve this famous city's peace, begun by yond first king, which does increase now by the last. From Henry that joined roses, to James that unites kingdoms, who encloses all in the arms of love, maliced of none, our hearts find that where neighbouring kingdoms groan, which in the magistrate's duty may well move, a zealous care in all, a thankful love.
You can put your unseemly garments back on now if you wish.
That's what they all say.
Yeah. This Tower of Virtue, this is the second component that we've been given here. The first component was the many worthies with Jason starting at Paul's Churchyard. This one seems to be the new standard, so once again we're sort of midway along Cheapside, and in a moment we're going to go to section number 3 on the other end towards the Guildhall again. Lots of things to throw in here. The Tower of Virtue, there's an awful lot of detail which is clearly not actually being actively conveyed to the audiences watching it. We've got banners with some names on, but also other ways of indicating all these worthy people, these previous Lord Mayors, etc. This film, very much a lot of that text was presumably more for the reading public than for the viewing public at home on the streets. Thoughts about that, Liza? Who were you, and what was your purpose in life?
Well, they're very they're a little bit anonymous about this. One in a cloudy, ruinous habit. I think it's the personification of a building being renovated, and I'm not sure which building. Presumably either the Lord Mayor or their company gave money to renovate the building that is talking, or the...
Well, as he's at the bottom of the Tower of Virtue, so is that is the personification of the tower itself?
I wonder. I mean, the White Tower did have a lot of modifications to it, but I'm not sure when those date from. And I'm really just spitballing here while we have actual historians sitting here and I'm wrong about a lot of things all the time. So
maybe we've got fame of whose tower this is at the top, and at the bottom of the tower we've got someone sort of going, oh, my ruins are going to get some repointing. New guttering being put in. It's going to be fab. I don't know. I'm spitballing as well because that just seemed like a fun way of talking about it.
Well, I could certainly use
on the standard, because the standard is topped off by the figure of fame. So I think they might be actually using the structure as the stage here. As to who this is, Middleton's not helpful, is he? I really don't know. I mean, it's unlikely to be the Super Tower of London because that was owned by the Crown, not the city. But it might just be a kind of just a metaphor for room.
He talks about the person talks about the figures of princes adorning him from Henry VII to James VI and First. Is that a clue? Were there those kings on the standard?
I don't know. Actually, they're all basically it's from Henry VII onwards, isn't it? So it's all that line. So you haven't gone back into any kind of confusing War of the Roses, who's legitimate or so. You're on safe ground if you start with Henry Senior and then move on through Henry VIII and so on. I think that's what's happening. The usual kind of family trees you get in this period are very much along those lines, establishing the legitimacy of the Tudors, followed by the Stuarts.
Yes, they talk about the speech, of course, mentions Henry who joined Roses, and that is Henry VII, the sort of vaguely Lancastrian heir who married the Yorkist Princess Elizabeth.
Eric?
Just wondering if this could be like the sort of, I think it's like, I don't know what statue this is, but like a statue outside like the Bailey or something, or what, like sort of justice and that kind of that ornamentation. But I don't know if that's too far or too new compared to this like reference. I don't know. Maybe the Tower of Virtue that this pageant is comes with a caretaker who's just really keen on it.
I think it is the personification of a specific building that got rebuilt, and but I do like the speech where the building is so delighted with their new fanciness.
I have according to the Middleton collected works, it's given to the new standard, which apparently was rebuilt in Cheapside in 1621.
So this is at the new standard. So it is actually literally a personification of the standard who's been re-edified. Okay, that answers that. We were dancing around that, and and we got there in the end. Okay.
Have a bit of context, bit of historical context brings it, like warms the cockles of your little historical heart.
We're all here for warming our cockles. Okay. We go to the third unit, as it were. So this is slightly further down along Cheapside as we go to the St. Lawrence Lane end. So this is another triumph that we're going to witness. We'll read on to the end because there isn't actually that much text for this one. So Angela, if I could ask you to read Phoebus in a moment. Eric, if you could read the first bit of prose coming up. Then Liza, if you can be the great feast ended bit of prose after Phoebus. And who was Fame earlier?
Greg.
It was Greg. Excellent. Greg can close us with Fame. That's almost like there was a plan. So, Eric, I think you're first up with placing us near St. Lawrence Lane.
After this, for the full close of the forenoon's triumph, near St. Lawrence Lane stands a mountain, artfully raised and replenished with fine woolly creatures. Phoebus on the top, shining in a full glory, being circled with the 12 celestial signs. Aries placed near the principal rays, the proper sign for illustration. Thus greets his lordship.
Bright thoughts, joy and alacrity of heart, bless thy great undertakings. 'Tis the part and property of Phoebus with his rays to cheer and to illumine good men's ways. Eagle-eyed actions that dare behold his sparkling globe depart, tried all like gold. 'Tis bribery and injustice, deeds of night that fly the sunbeam, which makes good works bright. Thine look upon't, undazzled as one beam faces another, as we match an iamb with her refulgent fellow. From thy worth example sparkles as a star shoots forth. This mount, the type of eminence and place, resembles magistracy's seat and grace. The sun, the magistrate himself implies. These woolly creatures, all that part which lies under his charge and office, not unfit, since kings and rulers are, in holy writ, with shepherds paralleled, nay, from shepherds reared, and people and the flock as oft cohered. Now, as it is the bounty of the sun to spread his splendours and make gladness run over the drooping creatures, it ought so to be his proper virtue that does owe to justice his life's flame, shot from above, to cheer oppressed right with looks of love, which nothing doubted, truth's reward light on you, the beams of all clear comforts shine upon you.
The great feast ended, the whole state of the triumph attends upon his lordship, both to Paul's and homeward. And near the entrance of his lordship's house, 2 parts of the triumph stand ready planted, viz. The brazen tower and the triple-crowned fountain of justice, this fountain being adorned with the lively figures of all those graces and virtues which belong to the faithful discharging of so high an office, as justice, sincerity, meekness, wisdom, providence, equality, industry, truth, peace, patience, hope, harmony, all illustrated by proper emblems and expressions, as justice by a sword, sincerity by a lamb, meekness by a dove, wisdom by a serpent, providence by an eagle, equality by a silvered balance, industry by a golden ball on which stands a cupid, intimating that industry brings both wealth and love, truth with a fan of stars with which she chases away error, peace with a branch of laurel, patience a sprig of palm, hope by a silvered anchor, harmony by a swan, each at night holding a bright burning taper in her hand as a manifestation of purity. His lordship being in sight and drawing near to his entrance, fame from the brazen tower closes up the triumph, his lordship's honourable welcome, with the noble demonstration of his worthy fraternity's affection, in this concluding speech.
I cannot better the comparison of thy fair brotherhood's love than to the sun after a great eclipse. For as the sphere of that celestial motion shines more cheer after the interposing part is spent, then to the eye before the darkness went over the bright orb, so their love is shown with a content past expectation, a care that has been comely, and a cost that has been decent, cheerful which is most, fit for the service of so great a state, so famed a city and a magistrate, so worthy of it all has been bestowed upon thy triumph, which has clearly showed the loves of thy fraternity as great. For thy first welcome to thy honoured seat, and happily is cost requited then, when men grace triumphs more than triumphs men. Diamonds will shine through, set in lead, true worth stand always in the least need of setting forth, which makes less noise than merit, or less show than virtue. 'Tis the undeservers owe all to the vain glory and to rumour still, building their praises on the vulgar will. All their good is without them, not their own, when wise men to their virtues are best known. Behold yon fountain with the tripled crown, and through a cloud the sunbeam piercing down. So is the worthy magistrate made up. The triple crown is charity, faith, and hope. Those 3 celestial sisters, The cloud too, that's care, and yet you see the beam strikes through. A care discharged with honour, it presages, and may it so continue to all ages. It is thy brotherhood's arms, how well it fits both thee and all that for truth's honour sits. The time of rest draws near, triumph must cease, joy to thy heart, all to a blessed peace.
For the framework of the whole triumph, with all the proper beauties of workmanship, the credit of that justly appertains to the deserts of Master Garrett Christmas, a man excellent in his art and faithful in his performances. And now, the shipping forecast. So, yes, Master Garrett Christmas, once again, doing a wonderful job. May I just have a wonderful shout out to the replenished with fine woolly creatures. I think that's such a wonderful description. Yeah, we've got this third piece at near Lawrence Lane with Phoebus, and then after the feast we have basically this line of the elements of the triumph are awaiting the return of the Lord Mayor to go home, and Fame does a victory lap. Two parts of the triumph stand ready planted when he returns home: the Brazen Tower and the triple-crowned Fountain of Justice. Does that match any of the pageants that we've... I know the Brazen Tower, because that's the Tower of Virtue and Fame, but the triple-crowned Fountain of Justice, which of the others was that, or is this a bonus one that we don't have? Liza?
I don't know about antecedents in other pageants, but the
I was talking about this pageant. We've stumbled across that, and I've just missed it.
But the coat of arms of the drapers were little clouds wearing triple crowns, 3 little clouds and 3 triple crowns. So it might have been an illusion.
Yeah, I'm just saying they're saying, you know, because they've basically parked 2 of the triumphs outside his door. One of the Brazen Tower, which was number 2. I'm just trying to figure out which could be the Triple Crown Fountain of Justice. So maybe there's an element to this that wasn't properly referenced earlier.
That is kind of what Middleton does, unfortunately. It's a bit sort of sloppy sometimes. It's like he blithely throws a name and you think, oh, what the hell was that? And the whole thing is, I think, certainly compared to the 1620 show, it's pretty low key, isn't it, really? It's, you know, there's lots of using existing structures going on, lots of pretty, what's the word, less than lavish devices, I think. Maybe I'm just saying it because I know the backstory to the whole thing, but it doesn't strike me as being, it's not very long either. Yeah, it just seems a little, I mean, it's perfectly fine, but it's just a bit, yeah, low-key.
Well, it's just, if there is a 4th pageant, as it were, the Triple Crowned Fountain of Justice, that, you know, it might just be that the text is quite incomplete. That might be a clue to say that there was more and we just don't have it, and it just wasn't printed. Or it's just a very simple thing, because we have no setup of stuff on the water before they actually go to Westminster. We had that in the previous one, where, you know, we know that they were doing things before they went out, whereas here it's just, no, we just start Paul's Churchyard.
Middleton's never interested in the water show. He just isn't at all. He shared it with Monday a couple of years later. So
yes, next time we'll be diving into that. Other thoughts? Sorry, that's my stage management hat on. Rachel, then Angela.
No, we were talking in the chat about how it's Sun and Aries, and that, you know, Aries is a ram and it's related to wolf. It's also like the first spring sign, so that being in the opening, I don't know, it kind of creates like a story for this, because it's like the first spring sign coming out of the last winter sign, and it has this like Greek myth reference. So, you know, it could be like Persephone's come back, and she's bringing this procession of all these people. Maybe.
Angela.
I was just going to say that it looks like a cheaper version of a print pamphlet too, because Edward Alder and Henry Gosson are both cheap print publishers, so they've not spent much money on that either. I don't know whether that's got anything to do with I haven't seen the text itself, but it's interesting. It's another way of saving your money.
Well, it's interesting, yes, because we've got Nicholas Oakes is has been pretty much the printer of the last few years, and will resume being Nicholas Oakes afterwards. So that might be a clue. It might just be the printer just said, no, you're only getting this number of pages.
It's possible. I think Middleton did have a connection with Oakes because he printed some of his plays as well, and he was certainly ubiquitous from, just checking a book, 1612. He gets almost a clear run, probably as a Perslow's, but right through almost the entirety of the 20s is Oakes. So yeah, maybe Old was just cheap.
He definitely was cheap. They were both cheap. They're
He was
my guys. They're my guys. I love them.
He was Monday's master when he was an apprentice. Old.
Eric.
I was going to say that the Fount of Justice that we're talking about, well, they're like, I just Googled it, so yeah. There's talk of like a Fount of Justice being sort of like the judicial system in the hands of the royals, basically. But also, I mean, aside from that, in the text, you've got sort of a clue, because it's beyond yon fun with the tripled crown, and through a cloud the sunbeam piercing down. So basically, it could just be a reference to the coat of arms of the Drapers.
Well, it's just to say that the text is saying 2 parts of the triumph stand ready planted. One's the brazen tower and the triple crowned fountain. So it's not the tower. So it's either the many worthies, or it's with Phoebus on the with all the many creatures, or it's a separate pageant. And that's the question that I'm currently asking is it one of the other two, and we're just missing a detail as to which one it could be, or is it a fourth pageant? Other thoughts? Sorry, I don't want to get too bogged down on this thing, because I don't think it's an answerable question. Other thoughts about fame, about Phoebus, about the personification of an upgraded standard, and Jason. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about Jason. Other thoughts?
I am reminded a bit of that other pageant that this guy did, where all of a sudden he just chucked in a whole bunch of characters that didn't seem to have much to do with anything, and he seems to have a little bit done that again here. So perhaps he was just busy, or I think we said last time maybe these costumes were just available, so we thought, okay, well, we'll have that then.
He was certainly very, very busy that year, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, there is some kind of Middletonian edge in here. He talks about some past dignitaries of the company, being glorified by founding colleges and temples and all the rest of it. But contemporary men are, subject to bribery, and so. It's also going to be that sort of slightly kind of, edgy note to everything he does. He waits till 1623, he really goes for it. Yeah. He says very little about Balcombe, but then I guess that was, apart from the rather tactless reference to Richard Pike, there's really not much you could say, really.
Yeah, I mean, we have many worthies. They don't state the number. How many worthies were there for this pageant? It's... we know we've got Jason, we've got Caesar, and a couple of others, that's the lot in terms of cast list. I don't know. Is there any particular that we know? There's some trumpets sounding. Did anyone else notice any potential music cues in there as well? We've had ones in the past where we have very elaborate sense of what the musical accompaniment is and how it's structured to go with things. But apart from the odd bit of trumpeting, I didn't pick up on anything, but I might have missed some things.
Yeah, you're right. There's an almost total absence of the description of music. That doesn't mean there wasn't any. Perhaps Middleton just wasn't involved with coordinating it. Because usually, at least for the water part of the pageant, they have some kind of music that carries across the water. Interesting. Wow.
Okay, right. Well, we're into extra time, so it's very much a matter of just sauntering around the room for final thoughts, other things between both pageants. We're into the early years of the 1620s, and time is moving on. Any final thoughts? You can say no if you're quite content. Greg, you look quite content. Eric, any final thoughts?
I don't know. Just like there's a part of me going, no, the Greek mythology, but then like obviously Greek mythology is like not fixed in stone. So anyway, yeah.
Rachel, any final thoughts?
I don't know if it's just how bare this one is, but there's I don't know, they always seem to have, not they always seem to have, this one seems to be so much of speeches and I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just trying to say that there's however they recorded their pageants always seems bare for the drapers.
Yeah, it's. I mean, both pageants are relatively bare, except the previous one we got a lot of description of what was going on in each pageant. So we got a sense of what was going on, and the sense of maybe there was more dialogue available, but you got a pretty good idea. It was this one of not getting that sense. We're just getting the odd speech, and we've only got effectively 3 pageants on this one. Whereas the other one we got at least 5, if not more. Even if mentioned in passing. Liza, final thoughts?
Well, we have the sun in Aries as our title, and with a couple of digressions for the Golden Fleece and how lovely it is to renovate buildings. We have heraldry was a motif in the last pageant. Astrology seems to be a motif in this one, and we've been talking about it in chat because, of course, the sun was not in Aries in October. Aries is a spring sign, and it's full of and the text is full of spring metaphors. And we've got that whole speech by Phoebus, Apollo. So, the cool thing about astrology and pageantry, of course, is that it's a lot of fun to put the astrological signs with their symbols. It makes a really nice visual display and makes people think cosmic thoughts.
Yeah, Aries placed near the principal rays. It suggests, there's stuff coming out of it. Is this the mayor? The mayor's new term is the spring. And green shoots.
Yes, and there's this theme of renewal with the renovation of buildings, and the guy throwing off his unseemly garments to reveal rich raiment underneath. But also, yes, Aries, of course, is a ram, and the drapers are big into sheep and woolly creatures, so...
Angela, any final thoughts?
Well... Personally, if I had known that John Squire had done the pageant in a particular year, I'd be along to it. I've liked his better than anybody's so far. I really thought it was good. It was really clear. It had a real theme to it. I liked the speeches. It was really good. And also, he clearly, made sure that people had the faintest clue what he'd been up to afterwards. I mean, what more do you want? He's my fave.
5 stars for John Squire on TripAdvisor. He's gone down rather well. Tracey, any final thoughts?
Yeah, this is something that happens with the 1623 show as well, which is the Triumphs of Integrity. Middleton is trying to present something that's not actually very spectacular. He's trying to present things like virtue and merit and worth. which are qualities he feels very strongly about, but they don't lend themselves to kind of lavish pageantry particularly. So I think that's part of what I think Rachel, you said about the very talky kind of quality to this show. There's less spectacle, a bit more reflection on qualities stuff going on, perhaps than some of the others. I think with Squires, it's much more, let's just go for it, guys.
Okay. If anyone has any additional thoughts that have just popped into their head, feel free to articulate them now. Eric has something.
Yeah, no, it's just because I've been scrolling, and like one of the things that comes up is the all the descriptions are basically gold, gilt armor, silver, gold, and they're like, okay, give it a rest with the gold. Like they must have still thrown a lot of money at that, even if it wasn't as spectacular as the previous one.
Yes, looking at the amount of gold in the 1620, no wonder Sir Francis Jones. When, so many, he obviously liked shiny things. Yeah, lots of gold. Yeah, it's fine. Who's paying for it? I am. Oh.
I think for stage you could get a similar effect with brass, as long as it didn't have to last very long, because brass goes green.
No. Squire said definitely. It's no metals used, but gold and silver. And he's obviously. He's a member of the clergy, for goodness sake. He's obviously honest. He said. Yes, we've been dealing with dishonest clergymen today, so this is very much in my mind. Well, we've begun this discussion on these pageants. This is always part of a process. This is the beginning of a process of figuring out how these particular pageants functioned, what may be missing, what can be inferred from the text. It's an ongoing process. There will be more. If you have any thoughts, by all means, put them in the comments. Follow us and say things on Twitter at Beyond Shakes. We're on social media generally as at Beyond Shakes, and you can continue the conversation. We have a website, www.beyondshakespeare.org, and all sorts of other outlets available. You can follow us on Patreon and subscribe and give us your wonderful money, which would help pay and make things come out of these sessions further down the line, and doing things performatively with Lord Mayor's shows is very much in our ongoing agenda. So yes, there's more to this than just videos on YouTube. You can join us online in other forums and available things too. So all that remains is to thank all these wonderful readers. So thank you very much to all fine woolly creatures, and goodbye.